On Thursday, February 3rd, 1983, Reeves Johnson worked his final shift at Donley. He was working the morning shift and he was expected to be off by 3:30 that afternoon. Nobody knew that this was the last time that he would ever be seen again. I'm Eric Carter Londine.
And I'm Charlie Worrell.
And this is Crime Lines and Consequences. So today we are joined by a very special guest, Miss Kristen CV from Murder, She Told. Welcome, Kristen.
Hello, hello. Thank you for having me.
Welcome to episode 2 of Crime Lines and Consequences. We're excited to have you on today. We know that this case is really important to you and to his family, and there's a lot that we want to get into on this. But before that, how's everyone doing today?
I'm doing great. You know, you might hear some pitter patter of rain, maybe a thunder clap, but hopefully no tornado sirens tonight. That is the hope. So hopefully you can experience our Midwest spring in kind of an atmospheric way and not in like a take cover way.
Let's cross our fingers for that. Kristen, how are you doing today?
You know, we had kind of an exciting day. I mean, not exciting for some people, but I guess neighborhood excitement. There's been a lot going on. There was a fire today, a really bad fire. And of course, the whole town like calls each other up. And my dad was like, Kristen, can you go figure out what's going on? So we went down and watched this like 4-alarm fire. It was huge.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Total devastation. Luckily, everyone got out safe and all of that. So that was good. But yeah, I mean, it's sad to see stuff like that happen. But there's a lot of excitement in the neighborhood when things happen.
Absolutely.
Yep.
It's kind of quiet up there in Maine.
It is. But it's pretty wild, though, because yesterday or the day before, there was an incident where like kids were beating each other up. So I'm like, man, what is going on right now?
Yeah. Well, I don't want to be rude, but enough with the small talk. We need to get onto the case. There's more important things to talk about, but maybe if you stick around, you might catch a little bit of a small talk at the end if you're into it. All right. So, Kristen, can you tell me a little bit about Reeves, who Reeves was, and whatever you can share about his life?
So Reeves Johnson grew up in the Philadelphia area. His sister Sally spoke with us. We spent quite a bit of time with his siblings, and she said that her father could have picked anywhere in the world, pretty much, that he wanted to raise the kids, and he chose Philadelphia. And so the kids were raised in Philadelphia, much to, Sally's chagrin.
Because he got offers to like move overseas, didn't he?
Yep.
And decided Philadelphia is where it is at.
California, Tokyo, and he just loved Philly. So they ended up in Philly. Reeves' siblings describe him as kind of philosophical. Like he kind of kept to himself. He was a thinker. He was a reader. He had these zingers. His brother Hugh specifically remembers these zingers, and he had like a wicked dry sense of humor, which is a very Northeast term, wicked dry.
What are you, wicked smart?
And they would also just have these really in-depth conversations. His father was also very philosophical and really encouraged talking at the dinner table and questioning things and not just going along with what your neighbor was saying, but explaining why you believe that. So he really challenged his thinking growing up. And I think that really cultivated a lot of curiosity in Reeves. But he was also just a very smart person too. So he grew up reading books like A Wrinkle in Time, and he loved the Peanuts comics and Italo Calvino, just very like, I don't know, books that make you think, that have these wild worlds and like fantasy and just a lot of colorful descriptions. So that's kind of how he grew up. They were a very active family. And when he was a young adult, he was early decision to Trinity College in Connecticut, which is just a small liberal arts college. He got excellent grades throughout school, except for his senior year, they started to drop off. And, he did fine through college, but then there was a period where they started to completely tank, which is completely out of character for Reeves. In his third year, he went and studied abroad in Italy for a semester. And then when he came back, he was a totally different person in a different way than you would imagine. He had hypoglycemia. And at the time in the 70s, this was a novel diagnosis. They knew nothing about it. And so he was coming back and he ended up having to drop out of college, but he was sleeping a lot. He was losing weight. He um, was just very pale and he would shake. And I mean, like sleeping 85% of the day.
I really can't imagine getting that diagnosis in the 1970s because my daughter's been diagnosed with reactive hypoglycemia and she was diagnosed a year ago. She presented a lot of the same symptoms you're talking about. She had the fatigue, the shaking. She passed out on the soccer field because, as you know, when you're exercising, your blood sugar drops. Well, if you're already low, it's going to drop dangerously low. We had all these workups done on her and her blood sugar just stayed low. And it's always low. But we've been able to treat it, largely with diet, which I believe is how they tried to treat it in the 70s. But when I mention hypoglycemia to people, I think their reaction is, okay, well, then she just needs to eat more often and she'll be fine. And it's like, no, it's a little bit more complicated than that. And it can be a lot more dangerous than that.
Yeah, I mean that he was a completely different person, and at the time they didn't really have a diagnosis for hypoglycemia. So he had to drop out of school um to figure out what happened and what was happening, and he moved back with his parents, and they would take him to doctors, psychologists, and people were like, "Well, he's on drugs." And he wasn't on drugs.
He was kind of profiled based on his appearance and like his liberal college that he went to. Like, oh,
Right.
well, 1970s, you're at Trinity and you have long hair. You're clearly on drugs when he wasn't.
Yeah. It was a big struggle. And then I think too, his parents expected a lot out of him. He was one of those kids where he had such a bright future. And there is like, especially back then, your parents are products of the 40s, the 50s, the 60s. Like you have a kid who is being set up for success, who is extremely smart, and then all of a sudden is just diving off the deep end. And I think that all of this too is compounded by the depression of not really having control of your life for something that you don't even know why it's happening. And the doctors are just like, well, he's on drugs, or try this thing or try that. And, he had to move back in with his parents. And I mean, I know that that's not like I met my parents, but like, there's a pandemic. But back then, I feel like it was a lot different. So
It must have been really hard on him to kind of go from being really on top of everything and really in control of his future, and then suddenly he gets this wrench thrown in him and he has to move in with his family. I just can't imagine how challenging and how emotional that must have been for him.
and this is like what they say is the best parts of your life, your early 20s and mid 20s. And this is just completely taking over his life so that he is a shell of a person. And I think it was a really rough few years for him, for his family, just not knowing what to do. So in his late 20s, he finally got this under control. They had a diagnosis for it, and he ended up moving to Kittery, Maine in 1978. His sister Sally lived nearby in Cape Nettic, so at least there was some family nearby, so it makes sense as to why he landed there. He lived in a small cabin on Jewett Court, which no longer exists. And then he started taking classes at Donnelly Manufacturing, which they did sheet metal work. So he started taking classes as a welder. The last time that Hugh and Sally saw their brother was at Christmas of 1982 at their parents' home in Philly. At that point, Sally had moved away. So for the last few years, Reeves had been alone in Maine without any family nearby because her husband's job sent them down to Georgia. I guess this is kind of a point of interest for a lot of people. On his way back to Maine, he actually picked up a hitchhiker on the Verrazano Bridge in New York City, and this hitchhiker's name is Richard. Richard said that he was either going to Detroit, Michigan or Ontario, which isn't in the direction of Kittery at all, but but he ended up going to Kittery with Reeves. And Reeves just kind of didn't ask him like, where can I drop you off? He just went back to his home because Reeves was like that. So he gave him a place to stay. But I think after a while, Richard was overstaying his keep a little bit. Like he wasn't earning anything. He was bumming cigarettes. He had a key to Reeves' apartment. He had the spare key. And one day he just left. So around January 7th, while Reeves was at work, he left and he took the spare key with him. So that's a point of interest. About a month later is when things change. So now we're circling back to the introduction. And on February 3rd, 1983, Reeves Johnson worked his final shift at Donnelly Manufacturing. He worked the morning shift, so he would have been done around 3:30 p.m. And this is the last time that we can say that Reeves was reliably seen by people who actually knew him. So there were sightings after this point, but I work with the detective on this case, and we don't think that those were actually him. Because if you look at Reeves, I mean, he's got like, the mutton chops, the long hair. He's, 31. He looks like the every white man of the 80s. So I could easily see how somebody could have confused someone else for him. So this gets a little confusing, but I'll go through it as like clearly as I can. That day on February 3rd, he deposited $70 into his bank account and he took out $30 in cash. And he purchased a set of guitar strings, which we don't really know much about that as far as the guitar goes, but that's something that we would like to know more of from an investigative standpoint, just because people
so not sure he played guitar, or
we think we assume he probably did, but in our minds we're like, if he played guitar, he probably I don't know, went and met up with other people who played music too. So where are those people who might know him? It's like we're thinking of it more on a social aspect, but it also could just be for himself.
Sure.
Over the next few days, almost all of his valuable belongings were removed from the rental cabin in Kittery. Pretty much everything of value. The only thing that was left behind were some boxes, his contact lenses, which he needed to drive, and the guitar strings. On Sunday, he missed a weekly call with his family. He would always talk to his parents on Sundays, but at that point, they were out of the country. So his sister Sally was the one who was supposed to be checking in with him. He didn't make any contact, which, you miss a call, whatever, you just try again later. This is the 80s. There's no social media or anything like that. Over the next few weeks, though, his bank account was drained to the point of it being overdrawn. We only know about this because we know about the check history and the account history, but all of these transactions weren't discovered until after the account was closed, after the investigation kind of started, and all of that. But these purchases were really out of character for him. He was extremely meticulous. He was very frugal with his money. He always paid his rent first, and he didn't really spend a whole lot on his personal, on like himself. I've read all of his letters that he sent his mom, that his mom saved him, and sometimes he'll just list like the things that he bought. And so it's just odd, some of these purchases that were made that just don't seem like him at all.
And not someone who would overdraw his bank account, and not by a little. Didn't he a bunch of checks bounce?
A lot, yeah.
Back in that day, they had to send the checks into the bank to get them paid. It wasn't instant, so you could bounce quite a few at it before it caught up to you.
I think whoever was using the checkbook tried to get away with it for as long as possible. So that week, there were purchases that were made at Radio Shack at Daymart, which is, it no longer exists now, I don't think, but it's a like a very fancy thermal underwear place. Which, this is in New Hampshire. You have a lot of ski resorts around. Daymark was popular because the Olympics had just happened and they were a sponsor of the Olympics. So it was a very popular, expensive outerwear brand. And Shaw's, which is a local grocery store.
Mm-hmm. We had a Shaw's when I grew up. That's one of the
Yeah.
things I like about your show is just I grew up in the Northeast, so it kind of brings me back when I hear things like a Shaw's and you just need like a Caldor and it'll be my childhood all over again.
Right now it's a Hannaford. I guess there are some Shaw's around, but it's mostly Hannaford.
Mm-hmm.
So the first big purchase was on the 4th, which is actually the day after he went missing. So that Friday at Shaw's in Stratham, New Hampshire. And this is not his normal grocery store, but it is close to Donnelly Manufacturing, which is in Exeter, New Hampshire. They're pretty close in proximity. And this isn't his grocery store that he shopped at. He would shop at one in Kittery. We don't know if Reeves was scheduled to work that day or not. If he was, he didn't show up. And the purchase was made for about $80, which is about $210 in today's money.
For one person, that's a lot of groceries.
This guy probably doesn't even have a full refrigerator in this cabin. Like these cabins are, we looked through old like city directories and they list the residents as transient. So
Okay.
in my mind, I wouldn't assume that there would even be a full refrigerator. It might just be like a mini fridge.
Right.
So where are all these, who's eating these groceries?
Right.
On Wednesday the 9th, the checkbook purchased 2 sets of thermal underwear. One was a size small and one was an extra large from Daymart. Both very odd sizes. The following day, $30 was withdrawn from the checking account and $50 was withdrawn from the savings. And Saturday the 12th, a purchase at Radio Shack was made for a set of speakers that cost about $50 in today's $50 in 1983 money, $130 today, and another deposit was made at Radio Shack for a $280 car radio system, which that costs $738 in today's money.
So the $30 from his checking account and the $50 from his savings, did he use like did whoever took it out use withdrawal slips or write like a check for cash? Do you know how that happened?
I'm not sure. Somebody physically went into the bank.
Okay. I guess that was basically my question.
Got that money. Yeah. So this isn't in my normal timeline, but the manager of the bank, which is Ocean National Bank, and it no longer exists today, said that they saw Reeves. So that was one of the quote unquote confirmed sightings of him. I guess he got it from a bank teller and they said that they recognized him, but it's just why it's really confusing, but I just don't think it's him.
Bank have security cameras? I know it was the 80s, but
They didn't.
Okay.
I know, it's wild, right, to think about that?
Yeah.
I wish we had CCTV footage from anywhere of these places that said that they saw him.
Right.
Or the places where the checks were being written would be nice too, right?
Yeah, I mean,
any of it.
We don't even have I want to see the handwriting on these checks, and we tried.
Yes.
Like the detective, we called the IRS, we called the FBI. We've tried to get everything financial related to that bank account that we could possibly get, and it just doesn't exist anymore.
So you're not just covering this case on your podcast, you've been investigating this case.
Correct. Yeah. Yes. I actually work with the detective on the case to investigate it.
It's amazing they gave you the access they did, plus the access to his family members.
I'll tell you how that got. I'll get through the timeline and then we can circle back and I'll tell you kind of how that all got started. But yes, I am working with a detective on this case.
Okay.
So on Sunday the 13th, the following day, a check was written out for the balance of the Radio Shack car radio. So he got to take it home, whoever bought it.
So wait, they put a deposit on it on day 1 and then paid for the rest of it on day 2.
Yes.
Okay. So they had to write 2 checks versus 1.
They had to write 2. Part of me thinks that because it's such a large purchase, that maybe they did that because it wouldn't flag it as fast. I don't know.
Right.
That's
Interesting.
my guess, but I could be totally wrong because I don't really know how
Yeah.
that works. In the original episode, I said that was in Portland. The Radio Shack was in Portland because that's what's in the notes from the original detective. But we think that's incorrect. We've since learned that there was a Portsmouth location of Radio Shack, and that makes so much more sense because South Portland, the mall, is like an hour and a half drive north from where Portsmouth is. So that was always something where I was like, why would they drive all the way up there for Radio Shack?
I mean, if they're staying in that New Hampshire little area, you'd think they'd still be there. So that does make sense.
Yeah. So now we know that there's a Portsmouth location, and I think that's where they were actually purchased from. So it's all in this, like, I don't know, 15-mile radius from his work, his cabin, all of these little stores are. His family returned home, and for the second week in a row, he missed the call, which now they're starting to, Sally couldn't get a hold of him that entire week, and his family got back. She told them what's up, and his dad called the police department and reported him missing. And this is about 11 days after his final shift. And I've seen
That's
the
a long
police
time.
dispatch logs. Yeah, it is, especially when, like, they don't even know yet that all of these checkbook things are happening. So on the 15th, the next day, that's a Monday, the police do a wellness check and they realize that the cabin is completely empty. And it would be one thing, too, if he had family nearby, but he doesn't. So nobody could just pop by and, see if things are okay at the cabin. The door was ajar, the pipes were frozen, and they knew that it had to have been cleaned out the weekend prior because there was a giant snowstorm and there were no tracks in the snow, and everything of value was gone. That same day as the wellness check, his car, which was a 1973 red Volkswagen Beetle, was towed from an unknown location to an Exxon station. We don't know why it was towed, where it was towed from, any details about that.
I'm curious if when they did the wellness check, do you know if police started asking the neighbors if they saw people taking things out of the apartment or out of the cabin, or if anybody could have seen it?
They did ask neighbors, and there was one neighbor, I believe it was Chris Schroeder, if I remember correctly, saw, I think it was that Friday night, a man walk into Reeves' cabin, but that's all he saw. Nobody saw anything coming out or boxes being moved or anything like that. They just saw this man going into the cabin.
Okay.
That's
That
really
was not
strange.
Reeves. So
Really strange.
yeah. So the police find out that his post office box in Kittery was last cleaned out around the 15th. And so then they call Donnelly Manufacturing. They find out that he hasn't been in for work, which is really unlike him. And so the police told Donnelly, like, make Reeves come pick this check up in person. Do not mail it under any circumstances. Because, if he's a missing person, you got to get him to come get it in person and show
Right.
face. So the last purchase from this bank account before the bank was like, you know what, your time's done. This game's over with, was on the 19th. So from this point, you have purchases from February 4th, which is the day after his final shift, up until the 19th of February. And this was another purchase at Shaw's, which is the grocery store in Stratham, New Hampshire. And it was for $61 of groceries. So you have another huge round of groceries for one person being purchased.
And groceries are a weird thing. If you're thinking of this, someone stealing money, generally when they buy something they can resell.
Right.
If they're trying to kind of get the money out of the account and then resell it or return it and get cash back, like not to tell people how to do check fraud or anything, but that, basically you want to get a little distance between you and the bank account, so you buy something and you do something with it. Groceries are not something you resell. And so it's an interesting choice of a purchase if this was someone else. I mean, maybe they were just hungry, but it's not usually how you don't risk theft for this usually.
Which makes sense to me with the the purchases at Radio Shack make sense. They're
Right,
very
exactly.
expensive equipment. And then, even Daymart,
Mhm.
even though the sizes feel like they were bought for somebody and not just somebody coming in and picking up, two expensive items and trying to
Right.
see if they can get away with it. But yeah, the grocery items are strange to me too, because at this point, nobody's in his apartment. There's no food in the apartment. So where are these groceries going? Where is all this stuff going? Now the bank hates this account and they decide to close it because it is spending money it doesn't have.
Mhm.
So the bank account was overdrawn and they closed it, and all of these checks bounced. So the businesses are on the hook for the money because Reeves' account
Yeah.
doesn't have the money. At least $80 was withdrawn in cash over this whole period of time, which is over $200 in today's money. $535 were spent via personal checks, which is over $1,500 in today's money. And, this is stuff that's really out of character for Reeves. On the 21st, so this is 3 weeks later, roughly, somebody tried to pick up the red bug from the Exxon.
Okay, so
And
the one that was towed from an
Mhm.
unknown location, because 1980s, we apparently did not keep records of of what looks like anything. There's no
No,
record.
we have tried.
I
We have
I guarantee you did.
So this car was towed to this Exxon. Somebody shows up in person who passes for Reeves, and passes for Reeves as in like later on the police showed a photograph and they were like, "Oh yeah, that was the guy." So that's what I mean by quote unquote passes. So somebody tried to pick up the red bug from the Exxon and they attempted to pay by check, but the mechanic refused the payment, so they left. My guess is that check was probably for Reeves' bank account, if I'm just going to take a wild guess. But, this Exxon guy is smart, so he refused it. There's no description of this guy. It's just somebody who looked enough to pass for Reeves. 2 days later, this same person comes back in and tries to sell the car to Exxon to cover the costs and then some. And he claimed that he bought the car for $1,200, but this car was actually a gift from Reeves' father, Kemp. So the transaction was obviously not made, and Reeves left on foot.
Very suspicious.
It's really bizarre,
Mhm.
especially yeah, it's just weird. So the next day, we're starting to like come to a head here. The next day, somebody claiming to be Reeves called up Donnelly Manufacturing, which was where he worked, and told them, hey, I know I'm aware of what's going on. I'm fine. Just mail the check to me at my post office. And whoever answered the phone either didn't get the memo or was convinced enough that it was Reeves, because they released the check in the mail. And this person also said, like, I've gotten another job. I'm not coming back.
But this is where the story gets really, really interesting.
Mhm.
Yes.
Reeves' parents are amazing.
They are.
They are. Yes. I'm very, very grateful for them and for the work that they did from this point moving forward.
Yeah.
There was a final check that was waiting for him at the Kittery post office. And his parents knew this. The police knew this. That check was going to end up in the mailbox. And this is a tiny, tiny police department who does not have the resources to really deal with stuff like missing persons. So they have very limited resources. And with their permission, Kemp and Barbara kind of staked out the post office.
It's so wild to me. Could you imagine a police department today being like, "Oh yeah, that's fine. Okay, yeah, you go ahead and stake it out." to some degree, it makes me think that at this point, the police really thought it was Reeves this whole time, and that Reeves was going to walk in the post office, and then the family can handle their family matter. Because otherwise, if they thought this might be someone else, someone who stole all this money, may have done something to Reeves, you would think the police would dedicate at least one officer to go to that post office. So I kind of get the idea that they just really thought Reeves was going to show up and the parents were going to have an awkward confrontation and it would be settled. But as we know, that's not what happened. So I'll let you keep telling the story and I'll stop interrupting you.
No, you're fine. I think that Reeves' parents even thought that Reeves was going to show up. Like it's weird, but they thought that maybe, there was like a mental break, something like Reeves' father wrote him a letter and sent it to that with a check inside and sent it to that mailbox, just being like, hey, I don't know what's going on, but this is after this point. But
Right.
so Reeves' parents, I think, were also hoping that their son would show up and that just, there's something that's going on that they haven't, and they can just kind of get to the bottom of it and help him. So they decide to stake out the post office. This is February 24th. It's kind of funny because his mom, they pretended to be tourists in the
Kittery.
office in Kittery, Maine in the winter. So Kittery is a tourist town. It's a summer town like any coastal Maine area. And nobody's coming to be a tourist in Kittery in the winter. So she's got like a camera and lucky she did. On February 24th, somebody did come into the post office and had a key to the mailbox, opened up the mailbox, and it wasn't Reeves. He took out all the mail. He threw out everything except that check from Donnelly Manufacturing. And tiny Barbara confronted this man and said, "Where's my son, Reeves?" And he said, "Oh, he's in an apartment with me in Portsmouth. If you have a car, I'll take you to him." And Kemp was waiting outside in the car, or so she thought, because they'd been taking turns inside the post office. But at that moment, he had actually gone to go get a coffee or just driven away for like 5 minutes. And so she snapped a picture of him. They go outside, and when they got outside, he ran off. And because she didn't have a car, she wasn't able to catch up with him. That was the last time and only time that they ever saw him.
Right. And I think this moment is the one that sealed it for me that this wasn't Reeves was not just deciding to take off from his family or having a mental health crisis and wandered off and started spending all this money. This man is what sealed it for me that there is someone else, there was someone involved and that something went terrible.
And the photo, you would think like, there's a photo of this guy. What does he look like? And when she developed it, he put his hand right in front of his face in almost the perfect position where his palm completely covers his face. And you can see a little bit of his hair. You can see the hat. You can see that the hat it's a red hat that has like a little white logo, but you can't make out the logo. It's such a haunting photo. And I think of that moment when she developed the camera because it's not like a phone where you see the photos instantly and you can take like 20 pictures at a time. You take one photo and then I'm sure she thought she got it. So she just kept going with this guy. Like you're kind of juggling 1,000 different things in that moment, like emotions, adrenaline, getting the photo, making sure this guy doesn't walk away. And then you develop that photo and you don't have a picture of his face. It must have been absolutely heart-sinking, devastating.
And then this check is kind of interesting because the guy went to the post office with Reeves' key for his P.O. box. So whoever this is knows enough about Reeves to call his work and say, "Send me the money," to go to the right post office, to go to the right P.O. box, to know what key to use. Like this guy knows what's going on, which kind of brings us back to the guy that he picked up on his way through New York. But whatever. We'll get to that. But this check, the guy never. I think. Do you think this spooked him because he never cashed it?
Yeah, he did not cash it. I think he knew the gig was up,
Mhm.
and I think he knew if he cashed it, he was gonna get in trouble.
Right. So that was it.
That was it. I mean, that's honestly, that's pretty much where the original investigation ends. Don't ask me why more resources weren't put into it after this.
So the check was never cashed, but you said that his dad tried to write him a letter after this?
Yeah, so his dad wrote him a letter, and it's basically just like, Reeves, I don't know what's going on, but like, we're here to talk to you. Your sister is upset, your mother's upset. Like, just let us know what's going on. If you need space, let us know. We heard from Donnelly that you had another job. So I hope that's the case. And then he gave him $50 in a check and
Mhm.
mailed it to that mailbox. And I think they came in the springtime and it was sitting in the mailbox.
Okay. So another sign that the guy knew it was
Yeah.
over.
That guy
didn't.
never came back.
Mhm.
And neither did Reeves. So
It's just so sad and tragic, and I really hope that there can be answers for Reeves's family. It's just I can't imagine his mom. His mom isn't alive anymore, is she?
no,
Yeah,
she is not.
it's so sad.
We do have her DNA though, so that's
Okay.
good. But pretty much that was the investigation.
Did they follow up on that hitchhiker from New York?
I don't think there was any way that they could have figured out who he was. They
He
only
was
knew
yeah.
that his name was Richard. He got picked up in New York City.
Yeah. There's a couple people in New York City, there's a few.
Exactly.
He may have been going who knows where. Yeah, but it sounds like he had access to a key to the cabin, which he would have then probably knew about the post office box if
Mhm.
he knew that Reeves was going into town to get his mail. He seems like someone who would have known enough to have done this. Or to have
Yeah.
been involved. I've done this. I don't even know what this is. It's an unsolved case. But whatever happened here, he sounds like he would have known enough
Yeah.
to have done it. But it seems like that guy in the red hat is the best lead if someone could recognize the hat.
Unfortunately, yes. I really do believe that if we figured out who this guy was or even where he was from, that we might be able to figure out what happened to Reeves. And I don't think that I've had a lot of tips about like identifying the logo. I can guarantee you if you send it in, it's probably something that's already on our list. It's just such a I mean, I'm always happy to take tips just because like even if it's something we already have, I'm always grateful that people send it in because it means that they're taking the time to like think about it and try to send in what they think could help. And that's always appreciated. But the hat is so there are so many red logo hats and like logos like McDonald's, Nike, Budweiser, Milwaukee, Schlitz beer. There's so many just generic red white label writing
Yeah.
logos. So unless it's like a local brand, but there's really no way to tell. But I mean, that
Mhm.
would be something if someone's like, I remember this local,
Right.
bar or something that had a hat or had a logo, that would
Mhm.
be something that would really, I think, help.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about what efforts are being made right now with the case and what our listeners and viewers can do to help if they want to get involved in trying to help find Reeves?
So there really wasn't much of an investigation until about 2021. The case kind of blew open a little bit. Detective Brian Cummer of the Kittery Police Department is the one who is kind of spearheading this. He is amazing. The family is so incredibly lucky to have him on this case. He would look at this case file every month and just kind of like wonder what happened to Reeves. So around September, October of 2021, he reached out to the family and he was just like, we should just get this out there if they're interested. And they were, they want to know what happened to their brother. They don't think that there's going to be an arrest with this or that kind of justice. I think justice for them would be just knowing what happened and then hopefully bringing him home. So that's really what Brian Cummer set out to do. And he put this out there in the public, the details. That was when I first found out about it, and it really piqued my interest because I'm pretty familiar with a lot of the Northeast cold cases, and I had
Mhm.
never heard of Reeves' name. And I was like, why haven't I heard this name before? And then I saw the picture of the man, and I was like, I'm reaching out to the detective.
Yeah.
So I just blindly emailed him. I was like, hey, my name is Kristen. I have a podcast called Murder She Told. I have a high
Mhm.
concentration of New England listeners, and I would love to help you get some coverage if that's what you're interested in. And he got back to me right away. We talked on the phone, and he was like, if you want to see the whole case file, the chief will let you. Like, come on down. And I
I
was
usually don't do that.
no.
Wow.
And I was like, yes, please. I also had reached out to the family as well because that's also really important to me to have them involved. And so we basically took 2 days down at the Kittery Police Department, went through the file, kind of processed it for ourselves, and then did interviews with the family and Brian, and produced this episode in November of 2021 just to try to reach new listeners or people, I guess, not just listeners, but reach new ears for the name of Reeves Johnson. And from there, I just thought that this was going to be like a regular episode for me because I work with families all the time. And sometimes there's ones that just kind of continue, like you kind of continue to work on. And then there's ones where it's like really intense for a certain period of time. And then they're just kind of like in the background. And, you interact with the family when you can, but it's not as constant. And
Right.
this one became one that is constant.
Mhm.
And I think our research for the podcast, I think, really spoke to Brian. And I think that he trusted the work that we're doing enough
Mhm.
to really start to like work with us on this case. So
Yeah.
we are now considered like part of the investigation, actually
Mhm.
working side by side. So that kind of brings us to today. Really, what we've been doing, what is so difficult about this case is that we have no physical evidence. We have this amazing box that his family saved, and it's of all of Reeves' financial records, his estate. The only records that we don't have are probably the key records that we need. But from post disappearance through, when his parents passed, we have everything. And we also have all of his correspondence, and just everything that they could compile about their son is in that box.
Wow.
So that we're really lucky to have. But as far as anything else, like I mentioned earlier, Ocean National Bank doesn't exist anymore. We don't have any of those financial records. We don't have copies of the checks and the handwriting that was used on the checks. There's no CCTV footage. There's no fingerprints. I wish so hard. I wish that we had a composite sketch of the guy. I wish that somebody
Right.
had been like, Barbara, let's sit down. Let's, get a sketch artist
Absolutely.
in here.
That's a shame they didn't do that. I mean, it's too bad they didn't do that. This is a small police department who didn't deal with things like this. Is this the only cold case in Kittery? Do you know?
No, there
Okay.
are it's the only missing persons case,
Okay.
but, there is a, 2 cold case homicides, from Kittery.
Has the Johnson family, have any of the siblings put their DNA to GEDmatch, which is what the DNA Doe Project and Parabon and Authra, all those labs, that's what they use for genetic genealogy in Doe cases. So I was wondering if they've gotten their DNA done and then uploaded it to GEDmatch.
Yes, Barbara
Oh,
actually did before she died.
okay. Well, that's even better
So,
than sibling.
yeah, they have her DNA on file, they have his teeth, we have his fingerprints, so we have
Mhm.
everything we need to identify a Doe.
Okay.
Um, and right now, I mean, the biggest thing that we need is more eyes on this case.
Mhm.
Like, the biggest challenge has been trying to find people who knew Reeves in Kittery. We have not found one person who knows Reeves.
Really?
Yeah.
So that's because, I've made this point like 3 times already. Whoever did this, whoever was involved, knew enough about Reeves. They knew where to go get to the P.O. box. They knew where he worked. They knew all of that. So who knew him and you don't know who knew him? That would
No.
be so if anyone's listening to this and they lived in the area at the time, if you didn't know Reeves, ask around. Did your parents know Reeves? Did your uncle know Reeves? Like someone has to have known him.
We have cold called probably like 80 plus people from Donnelly. We have talked to a lot of people from Donnelly who were able to kind of fill us in on just the work culture and other people. Some people have passed who we think maybe have known him at Donnelly, but we haven't really found people who were like, yeah, I used to go grab a beer with Reeves on Friday nights, or he would join our jam sessions or play chess with us, stuff like that. We don't have. So there's a lot of gaps, even just like in his social life. Like we don't know what his day to day life was like
Right.
because we only know what he told his parents.
And we all know what we tell our parents. So it's probably
Right.
similarly toned down.
Which I don't think that Reeves was hiding some, like crazy secret life or anything.
Right.
But, being a human being, I know that there are some things that you share
Mhm.
with your parents and some things that you share with your friends. What were the things that he was sharing with his friends? What did his just general day-to-day life look like? Can that fill in any gaps of his social circles or his work circles or, that's the most challenging part. So we really have to dig outside the box to try to find clues. Season of Justice sponsored a beautiful full page ad in the Portsmouth Herald to try to help us gain some
That's
visibility.
amazing. That's
And
amazing.
that was helpful. I don't think it generated any tips, but it did like help or tips that, became like fruitful in that sense. But everything helps. Like we were incredibly grateful for the support and the visibility for that.
That's awesome. I think that it would be really. I think you're right. That's a really missing kind of piece of the puzzle is who was he talking to? Who was he confiding in while this stranger was living in his cabin? Like what was going on during that time period and what was he saying about this guy? And did anybody meet him
Mhm.
during that time period? I think all of that information is sorely missing in this case, and I hope that somebody listening or somebody watching somewhere, maybe their brain, maybe they think about it and they have an encounter that may have felt non-remarkable, but it could be really important. I just want to commend you on the work that you're doing on this case and on your podcast. I'm a huge fan. It's not a secret. I wear your shirt everywhere. I love your show, and when Charlie and I were trying to figure out who was going to be our first guest, you were right there on the top of the list. So we're excited to have you here. Thank you for sharing this. And is there anything else that you want to share about the case or about your show or anything as we wrap up this episode?
Well, I'm equally a fan of yours, so I'm very excited to be one of the first guests. I just wanted to share a little win that we had that I actually haven't even shared this with my audience yet because I haven't done an update on this case yet.
Ooh,
But
exclusive.
yeah, so you guys are going to have it first. We have been, thinking outside the box to try to find little clues and little things like reading through the dispatch logs and stuff like that and trying to see if there's anything that pops out. And that was Brian's idea to have us help him search through those, like looking through city directories, just literally anything. There was a big question that we had, and that was who was Reeves' girlfriend? Because we knew that Reeves had a girlfriend. We did not know her name. The siblings don't remember it. It wasn't really anywhere. I don't think they were together for a really long time. She had a son. We don't think that she's like a suspect or anything, but this is somebody who knew Reeves, and that's what we want. So we we took in February, Byron and I, who also works on the case, 2 days at the Kittery Police Department to scan thousands of pages. We digitized the entire case file. So
Wow.
And then we also digitized some records at the Kittery PD because we wanted to use OCR to be able to search the documents for keywords like his street, his name, stuff like that. Because after a while of reading page after page after page for hours, you just start to turn to mush.
Yeah.
So we digitized all of these files. It took 2 solid days. We were there until about midnight, and we were finishing up the final pieces of Reeves' family box. And this is a box that I've been through before. I have a lot of photos of the box, like, on my computer. They played a big role in the episode, but it's been a while. It's been about 1.5 years since I've looked at the box. And also looking at it with a more like fine-tooth comb, like now we know what we're looking for. The first time I looked at it, it was very fresh. So we're scanning these documents. We're both exhausted. Detective Cummer has to get up at 6 o'clock or has to be at work at 6 a.m. So he's not there. So it's just Byron and I in this room scanning these documents while like the night shift crew is, playing cards and watching TV in the other room. And we get to the final document, and it is a letter from Reeves. And we read through it, and he says something about his girlfriend, and her name is Cheryl. And that moment, it seems so insignificant because it's like, okay, well, what's her last name? But seeing that name, that first name, felt like such a huge win. It was kismet. It was like a moment that was like, I know this is really hard work, but keep going.
Yeah.
Like the information is here, and it was at the bottom of the box. It was there the entire time. And it just took, coming back with a fresh set of eyes and finding it. So I emailed.
That's amazing.
I didn't want to wake Brian up, so I emailed him, and it was all caps, and it says her name was Cheryl on the subject line. Because this is something that we had desperately been trying to find.
Right. Because she would know more than anyone else what was going on in his life at the time.
Yeah. And I mean, it was a few years before he went missing, but at least it would give us what his life was like in Maine after his sister left. So we found the girlfriend's name. It's Cheryl. So if you knew a Cheryl who lived in Kittery, Maine, York, Maine, Portsmouth, New Hampshire, that area. And I don't know, she had a small child in 1982-ish. Email me, hello@murdershetold.com. Email the detective. You're not a suspect. We just want to chat with you.
Yeah.
If you knew Reeves, of course.
Yeah. Incredible work. And I have no doubt that you guys are going to be able to find and uncover some things here that they didn't have before, and I am just crossing my fingers and everything for Reeves' family and for everybody involved in trying to find him and figure out what happened to him.
Yeah, me too. I have hope. This is a very hard case, but I have hope, and it feels exciting.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing all of that with us, and thank you for taking us through the case and enduring our constant interruptions.
I love it. I love talking about this case, especially with people who actually did their research. So,
well, we definitely do that. I know your show, it's often you just talking and giving your thoughts. Eric and I, when we decided to do Crime Lines and Consequences, is we've been talking about these things into our microphone, and now it's time to have a dynamic conversation. So I really appreciate you bringing this case to us, and also the incredible work you've done on it. I mean, you decided to make a podcast episode 1.5 years ago, and now you're investigating a missing persons case. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's exciting to have something going on, in the background like that, and just feeling like we're making a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
You are.
Thank you.
Thanks for chatting with us, and you can join the conversation on social media by following Crime Lines and Consequences on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And with that,
we'll see you in a couple weeks.